Mustapha. Welcome to Psychedelics Today. I'm really excited to be chatting with you. We are here in Paulet, Vermont. Beautiful setting. I think a place that's very special to the both of us. Tell me a little bit about how did you meet Lenny and Elizabeth?
It's a good question. Well, thanks for having me, Kyle. It's great to be here. I met Lenny and Elizabeth through my wife, Allison, came up for a workshop, and she came home one day just smiling, at peace, really happy. And I said, "Baby, whatever you did, I want to check it out. Whatever you did." And so she told me about Lenny and Elizabeth and about doing breathwork. So and I'm kind of naturally skeptical with most things like that. So I said, I always think, what's the scam, or how are people making money off of it, and is it a cult, and are they appropriating some other culture, all this stuff. And I was really just happily surprised when I came up. They're just two really nice people who are just doing this loving thing, and we're just blown away by them. And so I came up and did a session and felt really nice feelings from that. Didn't have a psychedelic experience off of it the first time. And then I came up again, but it was very relaxing. Came up again, did another session, and had another really relaxing, really beautiful experience. But again, didn't really trip at all or anything like that. And then the third time was the charm.
So a lot of people listening are really interested in psychedelics, and I'm hearing you say you're skeptical, like what is breath work, and then coming up and not having experiences, or like not the, quote unquote psychedelic big experience. What kept you curious to come back?
Just who they are, and it wasn't a bad experience, and it wasn't really that I was looking for a psychedelic experience. I was really just looking for to become more centered, become happier, and anything I could do to do that is something I like doing. And the fact is that whatever it is, it wasn't a psychedelic experience, but it was just very peaceful. I felt more centered. It just made me feel good for several weeks, just this lingering feeling. And part of it, I think, was the breathwork experience itself, and part of it, I think, was the community here. Just getting around a bunch of loving people was a really positive thing. And so I don't think it was, the psychedelic part wasn't necessary for me, but became an extra bonus when I experienced it.
Do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about that third experience?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the reasons why I have been involved so much with Dreamshadow is because of a film that they asked me to make. So when I came up, just to visit Lenny and Elizabeth with Allie, a little while ago, they said, "Hey, will you make a film about Dreamshadow, about the work we do?" And I said, "Yes, of course. I'd love to do that. I'm a filmmaker by profession." So my experience happened when I was coming to actually work and film for the first time. And Lenny and Elizabeth were very gracious in that they got a group together who were all fine with having a filmmaker in the room doing this. And I was filming the first breathwork session. I had another cameraman with me, and filming the first session, and sort of after about an hour and a half, 2 hours into the session, 4-hour sessions, I kind of had all the shots, all the angles I felt like I really needed. And so I stopped, and I just sort of sat down, for a little while with the camera in my lap in the room, and just sort of closed my eyes. And then all of a sudden I started crying. All the tears started flowing out of me and just started bawling like a kid.
So this wasn't even really breath work. You're just in the room and sitting and...
Exactly. I was just sitting in the room, and I was like, oh my God. And Elizabeth, in her beautiful, loving way, comes over and puts a maternal hand on my shoulder and says, "Maybe you want to breathe tomorrow." And I was like, okay. Well, I looked at my cameraman, and he was like, yeah, I got you covered. So the next day I decided, okay, I'll breathe. And what I really kind of felt was that I was like, okay, well, my mother just passed away, And I hadn't really been feeling those feelings. I hadn't really processed that terribly much. It was during COVID. So a lot of emotions with that I knew were there that I just wasn't addressing. So I said, okay, maybe it's just that I'm feeling, I need to have a good cry.
Right.
So I figured, like before, I'll get on the mat, have this incredible cry, and that would be cool, and think about my mom and et cetera. Both my parents are passed now. And so the next day, I am lying on the mat, I start breathing, and then all of a sudden, boom, I'm on a rocket ship going out into space, like Little Prince, and like, whoa, what is this? You know, and again, I'm not really expecting a psychedelic experience, but I guess when you least expect it, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need here, So all of a sudden I'm going, I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, I'll just go wherever this goes. And it was more like lucid dreaming. I felt like I could stop it if I wanted, but I was like, whoa, let me just see where I go. But it was definitely, I was not in control of it. So, so I'm on this rocket ship going out into space, and then all of a sudden, boom, my parents appear to me, and they called me Mussy as a child, Mustapha Jr., but they called me Mussy, and they're like, hi, Mussy, how you doing? I'm like, what? And it was literally, I had a conversation with my parents, and it was the most transformative closure that anyone could hope for in something. Yeah, it was really, really beautiful. And, without getting into too much detail, part of it was that my mother was this amazing person, a great, civil rights leader and a community person and everything like that. But she also, suffered from some mental illness issues. And after she died, I really was feeling a lot of that, and feeling about and writing her obituary and sort of little biography. I was thinking, my God, she must have been in such pain throughout all this time, particularly as a young person. Schizophrenia starts young, and I was just feeling for her pain that she had, and how alone she must have felt, and having to be this, brave, proud black woman who's like changing things in society, desegregating things and all these things, and then privately, having,
really struggling.
Yeah, really, really struggling. And so I was crying, and I was saying, Mom, it's so good to see, but it's like, I'm so sorry for your pain. I'm so sorry for that I couldn't take it away. And she said the most healing words to me. And she just said, yeah, that was painful, but that pain doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It literally does not exist. I said, what? Just doesn't exist. It's not there. And my dad was like, yep, that's right. Right there, he just man a few words. Yep, that's right. And they were happy and cool, and the pain was gone. They were like, go live your life. Don't spend another second thinking of any pain, because it's not there anymore. And it was the most freeing thing. And all of a sudden, I had this new lease on my parents' death, and just they were like, don't worry, we'll see you soon, but not too soon. Go live your life. And so I was definitely like, wow, this is powerful. I have no idea how it works. I have no idea. Don't need to explain it. It just did at that point. So it's quite an experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I was going to ask, like, how'd you make sense of this experience? Because it's so profound. You're in this group context, breathing to music, and then to have an experience like that, where like your parents can come back and have communication. And, for most people listening that have had psychedelics, that's not so uncommon with psychedelics, but maybe skeptical, like that can't happen with breathing. Was that like a shock to you? Like, whoa.
It was. But, one of the things that I like about holotropic breathwork, and about particularly the way that Dreamshadow and Lenny and Elizabeth practice it, is that it's something Lenny said to me when we was talking about let's make a film. But the thing that really convinced me is that I said, well, let me talk to you a little more about it. And he goes, we have no idea how it works. We have no idea, we can't explain it. And it doesn't work for everybody. Said, for, all you do is lie on a mat in a group setting, you breathe, and after about 20 minutes, something happens. And something happens to like 85, 90% of the people, and not every time. Yeah. And so that kind of qualified kind of honesty, I really appreciate it, and it makes you realize that it's just a technique that can get you to this place. And then where you go is just up to you. So that just, I think maybe mentally that gave me permission to be open to whatever was coming.
Yeah, that curiosity. And I think that's important because, you know, sometimes when people are chatting about this technique or psychedelics, right, there's a lot of non-responders with psychedelics. Like, not having an experience is okay, right? Yeah. Like, there's also something really important about not having experience and not having your expectations met. And I think in our culture, we have these high expectations when we start talking about something. And yeah, I think that's a really important reminder for people to like hear that, yeah, sometimes it doesn't work. And for your, you know, example, you had to try it a couple times before having an experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's when you're not trying that it happens, you know? Yeah. I mean, the first time I did it, I really wanted I think deep down I wanted a psychedelic experience. You know, I wanted to trip, you know. I was jealous of hearing people going on these journeys. And, you know, just for me, I, don't want to mess with my brain too much more with chemicals. So I didn't do that, but it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And so you haven't had any sort of experience with psychedelics in the past?
I had two when I was in my early 20s, so a number of years ago. First was like, classic mescaline trip where, it was really, really cool. And with one of my buddies in Washington Square Park, and he was like, hey, you want to do mescaline? I'm like, okay. So
I feel like that's not everybody's intro.
No set and setting here. And we're in New York City, running around and found ourselves tripping. I mean, it wasn't very safe, actually. It was, found ourselves playing football in the middle of Canal Street with a Chinese takeout container of rice after going to China. But it was amazing. It was fun. We survived it, which was really
Those are things
great.
You do in your 20s.
Those are things you do in your 20s. And then I had a mushroom trip that was not fun because I didn't even know what it was. And I was by myself. And then I started walking again in New York City, walking around and like, oh, something's happening here. And just had to end up at a friend's house and staying there, and they had to talk me down and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, no, I don't really need to do this again. Maybe this isn't for me, But now my curiosity has peaked to do this through breathwork is really, really quite interesting.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to maybe backtrack a little bit. You've hinted at this film, and that's why we're here in Vermont. And I'll get to that, but would love to just maybe hear a little bit more about you and your journey as a filmmaker. Like, how did you get into filmmaking? What, ignited that passion for you to want to create films?
Sure. Well, thank you. I have always just liked telling stories, and more than that, hearing other people's stories. I started out as basically working as an anthropologist, ethnographer, and I had a fellowship after college to go basically do ethnography in East Africa and then in India and places. So I was about to do a PhD at Columbia in psychological anthropology, just wanting to hear about people's lives. I had a professor in college, Robert Coles, who wrote Children of Crisis, and he looked at societies through the lens of its children. And so very much ethnographic, documentary kind of work. So I kind of figured I'd do that via PhD and write about people's lives academically. And then after a little while, I started realizing that, maybe I want to make documentaries about people's lives. And you could reach a much larger audience. You could let the facts speak for themselves and let it be an emotional experience. Yeah. Kind of like putting people in the shoes of actually being there, and all these conversations I was having with people all throughout my whole life, and certainly throughout, when I traveled around the world, it's like, wow, I wish I could just share these experiences with others. So that was the impetus. And so I started wanting to make documentaries, but then didn't really have the contacts to do that or money to do that and everything like that. And so I actually backed into it by becoming I had a plan to become a director a filmmaker, a commercial director. So I actually started being a commercial director, and that sort of got me in the club, got me in the door. And from making TV commercials for Coca-Cola and Burger King and stuff like that, that sort of opens the doors. And then, start doing music videos and start doing concert films and, TV shows. And so once you're kind of directing, you're kind of into club, you could go from one thing to another. And that just sort of allowed me to then simultaneously make documentaries that I really cared about.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so, let's chat a little bit about this Dreamshadow documentary. Like, we've hinted to it, you mentioned it. How did this project start? I mean, we're here. We just watched like a rough cut of the documentary. You have many different cuts that we've been, chewing through, and so much footage. And I'm just like so grateful for you to spend your time along with Jethro coming up here and doing this type of work to kind of capture these moments and kind of tell the story of Dreamshadow. So how did this all start?
Well, it started... So when Lenny and Elizabeth asked me to make a documentary, I was like, well, what we really need to do is film a session. But ideally, you film a session where it's with individuals who have done it before. So it's already a crowd that's,
comfortable.
Crowd that's comfortable, yeah, exactly. And to meet everybody. And one thing that's interesting, I said to Elizabeth, I said, well, what we really want to do is just be flies on the wall. Just be, removed and, not talking to anybody or anything like that. And she goes, no, we want you to be part of the community. We want you to be part of it. And it was really interesting. And of course I just said yes, because she knows better than I do. And she was absolutely right. And so that was a really beautiful thing. So the initial thing that I mentioned to them is like, if you could get together a session full of people who are already comfortable, we'll come up and just film it and see what happens from there. And that's the way you make documentaries in general. You don't necessarily go in with a whole plan, or I certainly don't. You go in with a feeling. You go in with an intention, in a broad sense, to tell these people's truth. The thing that really convinced me wasn't really the subject material; it was them. There are not enough people doing great things in the world.
What is it about Lenny and Elizabeth that stood out for you?
That quite frankly, they were doing this for all the right reasons. When you make decisions in your life to say, okay, I'm going to make a film for a year or two, and spend a year or two making a film, it's like you want it to be worthwhile. We don't live forever, and there are only so many stories you could tell.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't really want to waste my time on telling a story that isn't about somebody doing something admirable. My last film, I asked the question in the film via music, what have you done with your freedom? And in some ways, this film and other films that are making now, I said, well, why not devote myself to some degree now making films about people who have done really great things with their freedom, really great things with their lives. The media in the world is full of all these stories of very selfish people who squander their gifts to just become more famous or become richer for whatever reason, and that ain't why we're here. That's not the point of living, and for those folks, it's good to tell stories of people who get it, who get why we're here, so those two as individuals they're great role models for people, to say what matters in the world. What matters in the world is helping others. It's being of service to others. And that's where they're coming from completely. They're not like, hey, I want to blow up and be famous.
Right,
they don't care about that. I want to, make a lot of money. They don't care about that. They're literally putting all this work in. It's not a money-making business. They're doing this because they got turned on to something that has transformed their lives. and they're just turning other people onto it too. And that's an incredibly fulfilling thing to do in life. And then you build community because of it. And my father and mother did the same thing in their lives. They were a physician and nurse in the community, in the Black community in Camden, New Jersey, where I was born, and in Cherry Hill, where I grew up. And they were community people, and they were just like, the only thing that matters in this world is what we do for other people less fortunate than us. And not just because, it's moralistic to do. It's like, no, it leads to a happy life. You actually have a happier life if you're of service to others. So those individuals who get that are people that I wanted to tell stories about. And so now I'll just sort of, as much as I can, devote my life to just telling those types of stories. And Elizabeth and Lenny are two people who do that.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I just think about the impact that they've had on so many people's lives. And you're right, just like showing up their love, their generosity, just being able to provide this space for transformation and self-discovery, and have made it so accessible. Like, I just think about my journey with them, and I'm just like, where the hell would I be without them? Like, I was like in college, I met them, and just allowing me to come down and shadow and train, and not expecting. It was just such a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah. And they changed the trajectory of your life. Yeah. And what a cool thing to do in a positive way. And it's amazing it must be really amazing for them to know that about all these individuals. So why not make a film about that? So that's really what motivated. Right? It's planting those seeds, and it's why we're here.
Yeah. What are some things that you've learned making this documentary around Dreamshadow, maybe yourself? Because you're capturing these really profound stories from a lot of the people that have been part of this community for a while. What's like a few things that have like really stood out for you, and what have you learned over the past two years it's been?
Yeah, it's been 2 years. Yeah. So we did that first session, and I cut some pieces out of the initial weekend that I spent here. So over 3 days, we filmed a lot of stuff, whether it be the sharing circles before and after, and the coloring, and the sessions themselves, and then interviews with all the participants, and with Lenny and Elizabeth, obviously. And then I kind of felt like I wanted to do another one, and they were having a very special visit from a very special session coming up from some people from Exeter University coming over and being there and participating not only in sort of a philosophy forum, but also another breathwork session. So those are the two big ones that we did. And what I've learned from both of those is how much people want to connect with one another. I mean, we, as human beings, especially post-pandemic, tend to isolate ourselves a lot. And it's very easy to isolate. And then once you start isolating and getting out of the social practice, it's easy to stay away from it and look at your phone, be in your own world. You feel connected to the world kind of in this really artificial way through your phone or through technology. But there's nothing like face-to-face. And so I think what I've learned more than anything else is the yearning that's in almost everybody that I've met here of connecting with one another. And that, when you get a group of people that even just a little start connecting with one another, that all the skepticism and negativity sort of wash away, or self-consciousness, and people just love connecting with each other. Yeah. And once people start getting that, it's like, wow, this is cool. So what Lenny and Elizabeth do, and what I didn't really realize before, is it's what I try to do as a director and as a professor, is create these ideal environments, or containers, as you say, but a safe container in which people can be themselves, can be real, and to connect with one another, because that's what we all need so badly. So that's the biggest thing I learned, is that everyone wants to do that. And that, I think of all the problems we have in our country now, and so much of it is because, we have rural folks not understanding what's going on in cities, and vice versa. And they're not physically getting together. They're not coming together in community at all. And it's this really crystallizes that for me, and that when you get people together, everything else washes away. So, to create those types of communities, whether they be built around some sort of therapeutic work or psychedelic work, is just so humanly necessary, and such an antidote to what we face in our technological society now.
Yeah, I think post-pandemic, right? Even just like I've noticed it myself, like the social awkwardness. Like, do I give you a handshake? Do I give you a hug? Do I give you an elbow bump? I remember like when the pandemic was first happening, somebody tapped my foot with their foot. And I was like, what are you doing right now? And they're like, yeah, there's this thing, COVID. We can't. And I'm just like,
I do remember people doing that. That's so wacky.
Yeah. And then coming out of it, and then it's like, we weren't even too sure we were going to be able to do breath work ever. There was all this discussion around, we're breathing in a room. We have this like respiratory virus. Like, can we do this? And, even just I think some of the, that first time you came up and filmed was kind of maybe like the second or third group that we hosted since the pandemic. And I remember there was like all this, like, I felt it like, oh my God, like, should we be doing this? And and even, so that social anxiety, but you're right. Like, that connection. And I think something that really stood out after watching the film, and then also watching some of these other cuts that you've had, everybody kind of talked about this community aspect. And it's not necessarily even maybe about the technique or the experience, but it's like the community that forms around it. And that is really special. And I haven't really been in too many places where, the people just keep coming back, and it's like these kind of like lifelong kind of friendships that have really formed here. But I don't know, what was that like for you, being a little bit of like a newcomer, making this documentary? Like, you're like, is this a cult? Like, what the hell is going on here? But I don't know, I'd be interested to hear, like, how has that been for you?
It's not a cult, which I'm very happy to learn. And I learned that kind of before I committed to make the film. So I was at ease there. But it's a beautiful thing. We all just want to be part of a community. The other thing that really appeals to me about breathwork is that there's no doctrine. It's without, no dogma, no words in Sanskrit or other languages that you have to learn, or another culture. It's just sort of, I love the fact that it's just a technique, but it's just a technique that is, at least the way they practice it, it's a technique that requires community. So it's not just breathing, but it's deep breathing within a community of people, a supportive community. And that's hard to create. And so I think when I just saw that, I saw, it's going to be fine. It's going to be great. So it wasn't really apprehensive. But when you are a filmmaker, you do put a camera in between yourself and the other person. And you're in a different, you're in a different position than other people. So the trick is to try to make that dissolve as much as possible, to try to make people forget about the camera and just be themselves and just let their souls shine. So
you do a great job at that. Like, I just remember when you're doing the interview with me, just your warmth, and like I could just feel the love kind of radiating from you, and the way that you're asking questions, and it was like, oh, you're making me feel so comfortable right now.
I'm so glad.
You just kind of have that gift, which is really beautiful.
Thank you. Back at you. Yeah. It's just, but it seemed like a whole community of people who felt that way. Whole community of people who actually appreciate other people's humanity, which is really all it is, and just not, and being genuinely interested in one another. And one thing that's really cool about the breathwork community here is that it's not like people are up in your business.
Right.
It's not like you have to share very much. You share whatever you feel like. But you can cry your eyes out around these total strangers, and it doesn't matter. Yeah. On a certain human level, they're supporting you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, they don't need to know why you're crying, and they don't need to know all the details, and you're not asking them to take care of you. And what's cool is that they're doing the same thing at the same time, but just showing up, being a human, sitting for another person, it's freaking amazing. I found the sitting process really, really fascinating and very therapeutic in and of itself, too.
Yeah. Can you go a little bit more into that? Like, what is therapeutic about it?
Yeah. Well, what you're doing is you are assigned, let's say, the first time I did breath work, okay, I don't know anybody here, but then you have an assignment and you take that responsibility really seriously. And it's like, take care of this human being. They're going to be in the most vulnerable place they ever have been in, and it's your job to just make sure they could, get up and go to the bathroom and that they're okay. And to have that intense focus and concentration on another human being that you don't know. You just probably know their first name, maybe where they're from, but it doesn't matter. You're taking care of them as like your child because that's your job. And in some sort of existential way, that is our job, to take care of each other. And so I think people tap into that. And so it's an intense experience of focusing all of your energy on one person, particularly in our multitasking world where we're, watching a movie on our phone and talking to somebody and having a conversation. You can't do any of that crap.
Yeah.
All you're doing is focusing your attention on one thing, and that is not about you, not about the script you're writing or this or the business you want to run. No, you're focusing on them and their well-being, and that's all that matters. And you're doing that for 3 or 4 hours. Total stranger. And they're doing it for you. And that sort of intensity of caring sort of is a crash course in recognizing our own humanity.
Beautifully put. And as you're saying that, just thinking about like what your parents said about giving back, right? And I think that's what helps with the community aspect, where it's like, if you're going on like a regular quote unquote healing retreat or something, like, going to ayahuasca retreat, there is a community that forms. Like, you do have these really tight bonds with people when you do that type of work. But the sitting, I think, brings out something else where it's not just about you. Like, I'm going to this retreat for myself. I think the sitting is like, wow, I'm going there for myself and I have my time. But now I got to put that stuff away and show up for this other person. And there is something, I think, really beautiful and healing about that. And as you said, like, really powerful, like, that first time just being in the room, sitting down and crying. It's like you're able to just feel all that emotion. And yeah, it's not about you. It's about the people in that room. And there's something really beautiful about that, because as Lenny's saying, right, and you portray this in the film, it's like, he talks about how, psychology is so focused on the individual, and, healing is not going to happen in the individual therapy room. And how, we need that community. We need to like go back out there and, support one another. And it's just a really beautiful model.
Yeah. I mean, alienation is one of the biggest ills in our society.
Yeah.
Alienation from one another, which makes us alienated from ourselves. So anything we could do to solve that, or any initiative that tries to solve that is, I think, really worthwhile.
Yeah. We were just chatting a little bit before at breakfast around accessibility. And you were having some thoughts about like, how do I bring this into like other communities? And yeah, just wondering to hear any of your thoughts about that, because that is a big thing, especially with psychedelics. It's like inaccessible, the time length, the money, kind of, if we're just thinking about a little bit of a medical model, whereas breathwork's a little bit different.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so I just think there's a great opportunity there. And what I was speaking to you about is particularly for communities of color, that need lots of healing. I think there is just such opportunity there to be able to help a lot of people in communities of communities of color and communities that are urban communities, communities that may not always be that psychedelics aren't the first thing they think about,
Right.
Because I think that I think breathwork can be a nice bridge to that. And I do think that psychedelics in general just allow us to expand our imaginations. And I think that is something that can help all communities, but certainly expands our possibilities of what we could be. And I think impoverished communities of color of all kinds, can really benefit from that. I'm not a public health person, or
Right.
I can't do it, but I would love to help that process in whatever way I can, because it's something we really need. I mean, the church, the Black church, is such an institution in Black America, but quite frankly, there are problems with institutions, at least in my opinion, and particularly when there's a doctrine attached to it and religion and all that goes with that. The fact that this is doctrine-free and religion-free, I think, is to have a non-religious way to build community is so valuable in a lot of communities where the central community building thing is attached to religion. So I would love to see breathwork become incorporated in more practices in other cultures.
Do you see any challenges there? So like from my perspective, psychedelics or some of these other things are just so accessible to white communities, right? And there might be that, is that just for white people, right? And it's like, how do we help bridge that gap a little bit more? Like, I don't know, was it like awkward for you to come up here and, majority of white people, it's like, do I belong here? Like, is this like, I don't know, how did you feel coming into this?
I'm used to white people. All my life I've been around white people, and so I've operated in white spaces and Black spaces, all my life. And so I don't feel uncomfortable in certain settings. I mean, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I do, for a variety of reasons. That's a whole other topic. But getting to your first question of how to expand this to Black folks or other communities of color, I think it takes Black practitioners to bring it into the community. So perhaps through there are plenty of yoga studios and people that do yoga practice and other types of community health practices that would be a natural fit for breathwork. So I think if we were able to bring breathwork to certain community centers and the yoga community and the New Age community that exists in urban areas and particularly areas of color, I think that's how you do it. I don't think 5 white people showing up in Bed-Stuy are necessarily going to start a movement, but with Black practitioners as well, and practitioners of color, I think that would work. And I think it's an exciting opportunity also because it would be the experience would be catered to some degree to specific communities. I mean, there is, been a Black church or Black sort of Pentecostal evangelical church, people get happy. People go into trances. I grew up in that kind of church. And so accessing the magical, the non-ordinary states is, I think, quite natural for a lot of people of African descent and of Indian descent. So I think tapping into that, respecting that, and somehow integrating breath work and psychedelic work into the community ethos and practices is a very rich area to go into.
Yeah, beautiful. There was something that was happening here where there were practitioners coming up from Boston. And I think we were all really excited about that, for them to go back into their communities and do that. And I forget what happened. And maybe they just got busy and things just like, the pandemic happened and, things shifted. But it would be a beautiful thing, because I also think there's, just in general, there's a lot of also stigma and fear around drugs, right? And like psychedelics, and having something so natural where it's just, your breathing, music, the community support. It feels like it's a little bit easier to like integrate into culture versus like, needing to take a substance, because there's a lot of people that are still afraid, right? It's like, I think the biggest thing I hear is, it's going to make me lose control, or I'm going to lose my mind, right? And that's a pretty rational fear for a lot of folks. And if you've been there and have probably lost your mind, that, you will come back, but, it is scary for a lot of folks to ingest something that could have really profound effects on their life.
Absolutely. And, the dual interest of psychedelics for the purposes of just mind expansion. But then you also have the other interests in it being therapeutic. Mm-hmm. And I think in communities of color especially, I think if you go through the avenue of it being therapeutic in some ways, I think it's a helpful thing.
Yeah.
But it's good to expand your mind too.
Yeah.
In a safe way, hopefully. Yeah. It'd be really nice if psychedelics were destigmatized and particularly in certain communities to be able to be accessible and done in a safe way. It'd be really, really great. We need that. We all need that.
What would the world be like if psychedelics, or just not even just psychedelics, but just these like non-ordinary experiences are just more acceptable? Could that have a pretty like profound cultural shift in how we show up and support one another? There was something that somebody said at one of our retreats. They're like, I wish I could just go back and be a pillow for that person in my life.
A pillow?
Yeah, how
That's
like
nice.
Sometimes we put pillows around people when they're doing body work or rolling around, and just like throwing a pillow so they're not like rolling off their mat. And it's like, that in itself is like so healing and beautiful, to just show up and be a support for somebody in your life, right? And I think that's maybe the beauty of this technique. It's like just showing up, not needing to intervene, just being there for somebody, not needing to fix it, not needing to change it, but just being there for somebody.
That's beautiful.
And, what would the world be like if we could just be there for people?
Yeah. I have a question for you. With the beyond breath work and the psychedelic community, are there analogous community support things happening or in the psychedelic space beyond breath work? Part of the idea of psychedelics now, and really our culture in general is very self-centered. Mm-hmm. What's in it for me? What can I do for myself? Self-improvement, But are there other ways in which people incorporate community and taking care of one another with psychedelics?
I think people are thinking about that more, right? Like creating free integration circles, creating free meetups. One of our colleagues and friends of the show, Kwasi Adusei, sorry, Kwasi. When we first met him, he was going out and creating free park cleanups. And it was a psychedelic kind of society event where they'd go and clean up parks, right? It had nothing to do with like integration. It had nothing to do with like ingesting psychedelics. It was like, what is the psychedelic ethos here? How do we create community around it? And then also do something for the community. And I'm like, that's beautiful. Like we need more of that stuff, right? Like that is a psychedelic ethos. Let's take care of the planet. So instead of sitting there thinking about, oh, what's my integration process? I need to put more workshops on and do this and that. How about we just get together and pick up trash, right? Like that's a really beautiful thing.
That is. That's great.
see it like, I'm sure it's happening, right? Like there's so much stuff happening in the past few years. It's hard to keep up with every little thing. But when it starts to like revolve around, I think, psychedelics or the substance, that then starts to become the focal point for a lot of people. So like we could think about like maybe non-psychedelic meetups where it's like people are using, say, combo, or they're using ape, like the tobacco snuffs, and it's still revolved around this ceremony in a sense. And it's like, how do we bring the work outside of the ceremony and start to contribute to like, the larger whole? And, I'm guilty of it at times, of not being able to foster that just with so many things going on. But, even something like this, I think, we put this podcast out for free. We're just trying to, reach a lot of people with all these different conversations and topics. And, that's the primary goal. Like, Joe and I started this just as like, we want people to just, have these conversations and put it out there, not trying to like make it into this huge thing. I mean, business perspectives have changed over the years as we've gotten a team and, the business behind it. But like, this has always just been something that we're like, we started it because we wanted it for the community. We're like, how do we have these conversations for a community that wants to listen? And it was never anything about like beyond that. And it really started also with Lenny and Elizabeth. It was like, we want to kind of just talk about breathwork. We want to talk about the legacy of Dreamshadow and Lenny, because they've impacted us so much. So I think it is important to think about things like outside of it. Like, and so like here at Dreamshadow, right? It's like they have the workshops, people are doing that. And that's when like most people might come. But I mean, they also host a lot of free meetups here in a sense, right? It's like this weekend, right? It's like, let's come and watch a movie together. And, we'll eat food together. We'll chat about this film. And they've done that like throughout the years. It's like, hey, we're just having like a little meetup here just to get together. And that's beautiful, right?
Yeah, it
like
really
that's,
is.
That's really special. And again, I think we've heard this throughout the documentary. It's like, it's not always just about the breathwork experience. It's about the people that like are starting to come here, the connections that are being made. And then how are you going to go out into the world and create those ripples within your community? But I think it is important to start thinking outside of just the experience.
Yes.
And how are we going to contribute to our community in different ways other than just doing the work, right? Because it's like you do the work, but then you got to go back out and, offer it in a different way. And maybe it's a park cleanup. Maybe it's,
Maybe. Well, it's funny. I mentioned that I went to a breaking convention in April, and in London they had a one-day thing, and I met all of these amazing researchers. And one that really struck me, and I just forget his name right now, was doing what he did was go to Israel and Gaza, and does have these ayahuasca retreats with Palestinians and Israelis together, and they all talk about their feelings and lots of big feelings with that, but trying to create peace and understanding between two warring factions.
Leor Roseman, I believe.
Yeah, Leor. Yeah. He's amazing.
Yeah,
he's really, really amazing. What a great guy. I think there are people working on that, and to make it to be culturally aware. I think there are ways to do it. I mean, the whole idea that we're so used to doing things, or our brains are so used to following these neural pathways that we do over and over and over again. There's sort of this loop or circuitry that just happens all the time. In the same way that that we need to break out of that. Both in our individual brains, but in society, that we have looped around and around and around in the same pathways that we normally always take, and we need to find new pathways. And I think psychedelics is a way to show us at least one way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you're saying that, it's just reminding me of like some of the conversation that maybe some of us had last night around being in group, and how being socially connected is scary for a lot of people, right? And so I think it is easier to be alone, to be more kind of focused on the individual, like just thinking about, the one person in the film is like, I hate groups. Like I hate talking in front of people. And it's like one of our most primal fears. It's like, what if I say something, I get rejected from the group, then I'm on the outside. And, from our primal ancestry, I mean, that meant you probably were going to die, right? Of like not getting food and not being part of that group.
But there's that impulse to want to be part of it. That's what's driving it underneath. So someone says they hate being in a group. They're also saying, I wish I didn't hate being in a group because I want to be here. Yeah. You know what I mean? I want to be able to be in a group comfortably.
Yeah. What is it like? How do we get more comfortable being in groups?
By doing it and practicing it, I mean, I've always considered myself a very social person that loves being in groups, but I've, since the pandemic, found myself more shy and it's really hard, but I've sort of forced myself to do it, and every time I force myself to do it, I feel better, but there's so much pressure not to. The momentum, if you just stay in stasis and you don't make that effort to be in a group, it's like, okay, I'll just stay home and do this, or I'll be by myself. Somehow we have to break out of that. I also have come to think, and I don't implement this in my own life at all, but I think routinely getting together in groups is very helpful to making it happen. You have to show up. You have to be there, or there's a plan to do it, so you don't have to initiate it so much yourself. And I think being in a non-judgmental place really makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Like it's interesting to sometimes be here, and sometimes I show up and I'm cranky, or like your process is starting. I think being here just naturally brings that out of like the decade plus of memories of coming here and dealing with your own stuff. And there's sometimes I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody. And I'm just like, and everybody's totally fine with that. It's like, I'm just going to go, but I'm here. Right. And I think just being held in that, and like, people respect that. I go, okay, we're all in our process, and it's okay if we're like all feeling kind of crappy right now, but if you need anything, I'm here for you. Right. And that's nice to like be in a group where it is non-judgmental, and it's like, you can be cranky for today, right? Like that's totally fine, versus like being in a group and like people wanting to pull that out of you and like try to fix it, versus like, you're just having like a rough day, your emotions are at the surface, like go be cranky. That's totally fine.
Or depressed.
I
don't have to fix it. But hey, I'm here. It's really it's quite relieving in that way.
What are you hoping for out of this film? So, there's a screening coming up in October. I don't know when this episode's going to get released. Maybe by, it might be released by October. I think it's the weekend of October 26th, up here in Manchester, Vermont.
I believe so, yes.
And so what are your goals for this film?
Well, it would be nice I want to think of the Manchester screening as a preview, not necessarily the premiere. But it would be really nice to premiere the film in a large venue, and maybe at a film festival of some kind, or different film festivals, and sort of do a film festival tour. And part of the idea is to introduce a lot of people to the work of Lenny and Elizabeth, and the work of Dreamshadow, and the work of just the whole trip of breathwork in general, and this kind of community support and building. So would like to get that out to a larger general audience as much as possible. And so I think one thing that's nice about all the different outlets that are out there, Hulu or Netflix, HBO, whatever it might be, you could target. You don't have to have everyone like your movie.
Right.
You just need a small number of people to love it, to totally get it. And I think that on some of those platforms, there's an ability to, if you couple that with targeted, marketing, you can get it out to people. So that would be the goal, to be able to, in a larger way, to just introduce the idea and put the idea out there of this community. And again, it doesn't have to be doesn't have to be as big as, Michael Pollan's series or anything like that, but just to be accessible to those people who would want to find something like this, to just have, in some ways, something to believe in, which is really what this is beyond breathing itself or the practice itself. And what I mean by something to believe in is just that our better angels of our nature, that there are people out there who are just creating something for other people. And so ideally, to answer your question, I would like it to get out to as general audience as possible, one, and two, get out to the specialized audiences like the psychedelic audience, the psychological healing audience, new age audience, whoever it might be, to just spread the word and to help the movement.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm sure Psychedelics Today will probably do a screening at some point, so folks can stay tuned. And I'm so excited for it. I'm just so grateful for both you and Jethro for putting this together. I think just as kind of like part of the Dreamshadow community, to have a lot of this archival footage and just being able to like go back and hear Lenny's story. And, for us, that's really special, for folks that are listening, and you've probably been hearing us talk about Dreamshadow for a very long time. And now, to be able to have a feeling of like what this is about, I'm just really excited about it. And I think, the way that you put it together, you did a really awesome job of like, and I know there's might be multiple cuts and different things here, but the one that we watched last night where it's this really beautiful balance of, talking about breath work, not just so focused on, the Dreamshadow organization, sharing Lenny and Elizabeth's story, and then also like the community focus. And that's the one thing that really kind of came out, I think, last night when watching. It's like, everybody's just talking about this community focused aspect of this work. And that's what I think really shined through to me. And it's like, it's not just about Dreamshadow and Lenny and Elizabeth, right? It's like a little bit bigger than that. And yes, they're, kind of propagating this and have been so transformative in so many different ways and inspiring so many different people to go out there and share their work. But yeah, it's really about the kind of container and setting that they've created. And that's just so beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those very kind words, and thank you for getting it. Yeah. That is what it's about. It's beyond the technique. It's about what's possible through love.
Yeah.
And just human beings taking care of each other. We're creatures that are capable of that. So let's celebrate that wherever we can.
Yeah. I would say that might be a beautiful place to end, on love and humans taking care of each other.
Not bad. Hopefully we could do it.
I really like that. Well, I guess on that note, I am looking at the battery of this, and we're on the last bar too. Is there anything that you want to close with? Any final thoughts here?
Only that I'm really grateful that you're doing the work you're doing. And I find that very, very inspiring. It's really cool that these same people that I've come to know and love, Lenny and Elizabeth, have, in their love and their work, changed the trajectory of your life. And I'm very thankful that you share that story. And it's very cool just to, you're open to your road, which is really cool to see. And because we don't know what's going to happen next. No freaking idea. But to do that with a focus on making the most of your life, making the most of your freedom, making the most of loving your community and people, I really appreciate. So it's always nice to find kindred spirits.
Thank you. And it's been so wonderful getting to know you for the past 2 years and collaborating on this project, being part of it. And that was the other thing. part of like what I think you were highlighting too is the like I talked about the community, but inviting everybody to participate, and that has been really beautiful. Like
thanks.
just showing how everybody is part of this. It's not just focused on one little individual or anything like that. And yeah, I think that really highlights things. You have some documentaries and videos up on Amazon and maybe some other streaming platforms. If people want to watch any of your work,
absolutely.
Where can they find you?
I have a movie called Song for Our People that is streaming now on Amazon Prime and also Apple TV Plus. So please watch that if you can. I'd really appreciate that. And that's a more personal work that it's a music project and has to do with African American culture, but also for everybody, our responsibility to one another, and it's an homage to my parents, which is a common theme, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, it'd be great. Please watch that. Also, if you've watched, I sort of made my name more in making children's television. Sesame Street made a lot of Sesame Street specials. So if you really want to watch those, they're all over the place. So Amazon, so I made their 25th anniversary special, all Elmo Palooza, all these, all these things with Muppets and
I don't think I knew that actually.
Oh yeah. And I've made have a movie that's out that's also available on Amazon Prime, a regular feature car racing movie about a small town guy. It's a movie called Rocksteady. And I made it like 10 years ago, but it still plays and people are watching it. Cool. And it's a sort of a fun, it's sort of Rastafarian culture and stock car racing in upstate New York. Yeah.
That's super
total stoner movie. It's a lot of fun. Nice. And the band Still Pulse is in it too. So it's got a lot of reggae music and a lot of stock car racing, which is really fun, like amateur stock car racing. So it's really about growing up, but also about fathers and sons and children and their parents and stuff. So please check it out, Rocksteady.
Cool. And you have a website?
Yes, just MustaphaKhan.com.
Sweet.
So check it out there.
Mustafa, well, thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to sit down with you and be on the other side.
There you go. That's a pleasure. You're a great interviewer, so I appreciate you.
Awesome. Well, until next time, everybody, thanks for listening, and thank you again, Mustafa.
Thank you.